Hey guys, I'm Larry from IoTeX. I'm here with Adam for REIMAGINE 2020. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to REIMAGINE 2020. This is the Halloween edition, what we call Tales from the Crypto. This is our fourth event within the REIMAGINE series of conferences. We kicked it off in May and have just been rolling since. Very fortunate to have quite a few influencers, global leaders in the space, and now I have Larry joining us again today. I'll be your host, Adam, from the MouseBelt team. So if you missed out on any of our last events, we have about 3 events from May, September, May, August, and September. Feel free to visit the REIMAGINE 2020 website at ri2020.io for full access to over 150 interviews from some of your favorite projects and individuals in the space. Our main goal is to talk shop with the top projects and leaders in the industry to shed light and help us understand, blockchain's real impact and innovation, advancements towards Web 3.0, and the decentralized infrastructure of our future. So without further ado, I have an exciting guest, one of my favorites. He is a partner and member of the MouseBelt Blockchain Education Alliance. Starting to become a regular on the show here. So I have Larry from IoTeX to talk about blockchain and IoT in the environment of IoT today. So what's going on, Larry? How are you?
I'm great, man. Thank you so much for having me back. And it seems every few months we get to catch up and share some updates. And just the pace of the blockchain and IoT industry is moving fast, just as the entire blockchain space. So happy to provide some color for the audience today. Just share a little bit about what we're up to at IoTeX.
No, awesome. I mean, I think, first of all, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. Very appreciative. You're always supportive of kind of our initiatives and campaigns, and we're a big fan of your project and team. So let's just kind of kick it off, and we were just chatting just a little bit ago about, I've had you on a panel. We've had you on, a couple times in the conference. You and I have chatted on the phone many times, and a lot of movement going on. And so I was thinking about today's discussion and kind of where can we shed some new light? And you just brought it up that you're doing podcasts, so you're trying to keep it fresh and for our audience. And if you missed Larry's last interview, again, go to the REIMAGINE YouTube channel and check that out. But I think to kick it off, let's get some updates real quick. Last time you and I chatted, there were some kind of initiatives and focuses, back in spring, and some of the goals were making it easier to integrate the IoTeX platform. And what I mean by that is documentation, toolkits, SDKs in various languages. So can you shed some light on that and kind of what's been going on? We could start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a good part of IoTeX that we've really been focusing on a lot this year. Earlier this year in June, we launched our mainnet GA, which is kind of our fully native network. We've been building it for the past 2.5 years from scratch. So it's a really big event, kind of clocking it in June. And from there, really starting to launch a lot of new documentation, brand new docs page, but brand new developer portal to really, unleash what we've been building behind the scenes and making it available to everyone in an open source fashion, right? And just to take a step back, for those that don't know too much about IoTeX, at the core of what we do, we're a smart contract platform, right? But we really focus on the intersection of blockchain, IoT, and privacy. And IoT meaning all these billions of smart devices that are emerging in our homes, in our businesses, and even our daily lives everywhere, right? So as the number of IoT devices grows, there's probably going to be about 50 billion IoT devices in the next 5 years. The amount of data that's also being generated grows exponentially as well, to the tune of 80 zettabytes of data by the year 2025, which is 80 trillion gigabytes of data, right? And it's just mind-blowing to think about, but it's even more mind-blowing to think about, out of that 80 trillion zettabytes, if we don't do anything between now and then, how much of that is going to be owned by users and consumers and small businesses, and how much is going to be owned by the oligopoly of cloud providers and tech giants, right? So we need to take action, not only to build new products internally, like UCAM, which we'll love to talk to you a little bit more later. This is the first powered by IoTeX product, but also allowing other people to build devices and applications that let people own their data from their smart devices. And this is another big pillar. It's called Pebble Tracker. And it's basically a Raspberry Pi style dev board that's really going to unleash the power of blockchain and IoT for everyone. So at a high level, that's what all this documentation and all these tutorials are about, how to harness the power of our IoT devices mixed with our blockchain to do things really like no other chain is doing. And happy to dive in a lot more throughout the call.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you touched on a lot of things that we'll get into. Obviously, a couple of those products there, which I will tie into some of the technology. You just gave a high level overview of what IoTeX is doing with blockchain in the IoT environment. So we'll touch on those products. And then we'll also kind of include like why IoTeX scales, why it's more privacy centric, right? And some of those things on the consensus and why it works.
Right.
And we'll touch on that. So before we get into that, so how has been the development efforts, as I mentioned, like on onboarding developers? Are you seeing a pickup of innovation? And I take that back. Are you providing a lot of resources, which was your goal at the beginning of the year? How's that coming around?
It's definitely, we've launched, I think, multi-language SDKs, both on the blockchain side. So that's people to, more easily interact with our blockchain, query the blockchain, build applications on the blockchain. But another set of SDKs is on the embedded side. And if you think about an SDK as just a way to unlock and tap into whatever platform you're looking to build on, we have that on the blockchain side. We also have it on the device side, right? And a device side embedded SDK is a little different than what you would expect from a traditional smart contract package that lets you have a framework and build out dApps. A lot of the embedded SDKs for devices like this is all about how to capture the raw data, do data validation on the edge, sign the data, and then write it to the blockchain for use in smart contracts, right? So the combination of hardware and software, rather tamper-proof hardware and tamper-proof software in the form of blockchain, is something that's so powerful, right? But it all starts with having verifiable data before you write it to the blockchain, right? And I think this is a really important concept to understand, right? Just like the way Chainlink and other Oracle providers bring verifiable price feeds to DeFi applications, so that downstream processes can have this assumed trust, right? Without knowing for a fact that this price feed is trusted, you can't run any processes on top of it because all that's going to be corrupted, right? Same thing with IoT data. If we can't bring IoT data that's verifiable and we know comes from this device and anyone can trace it just like they would a blockchain transaction, then we're not really adding new verifiable data or new verifiable value to the network, right? So a lot of the embedded SDK side of things and the tutorials are all about how do you bring data that's indisputable from the real world into the blockchain. And for this device, Pebble Tracker, it does things like GPS location, temperature, air pressure, air quality, air humidity, motion, light, vibration, etc. Right? So it really gives a full 360 view of an asset's environment, and not only takes care of the collection side of things, but also the oracleization to the blockchain. It's kind of like everyone can create their own real world data oracle with these devices. So it's something we're really excited about.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I might as well just get into the technical aspects as of now. We'll get into some of the updates later, but because you're going on, you're going in this direction here. And I want for the viewers, right? We have all these smart applications and products that we use, as we all know, refrigerators and phones and other devices, tons of devices. As you mentioned, there's going to be billions of devices. I don't know if people understand though, kind of the value that you also bring, or the value that you're creating from the IoTeX platform, such as the issues with IoT, some of the issues actually, which come to scalability, like high operating costs, privacy concerns, lack of like functional mechanisms.
Right.
And, I might as well talk about it now. We can get into the other stuff later. But as I was doing some reading on it, you guys really like hit these pain points to deliver a product or a platform or, your network.
Right.
to tackle these things so you hit those challenges like the nail on the head. So can you elaborate a little bit on, like, first of all, it's expensive, like on the hardware side, and you just touched that. You do some embedded things, right?
Mhm.
The scalability issues on the back end. So you're providing a software,
Mhm.
and then IoT is like not really secure. Everything
Mhm.
is on Wi-Fi. All these devices are connected.
Mhm.
Passwords are out there, right? And so there's those issues, and you're tackling all those. So maybe I'll let you kind of take my long-winded question, but the point of my question is, I don't think people understand the vulnerabilities of like all of these devices that you're providing, and I
Yeah.
really want to touch on how IoTeX tackled that, and that could be like on the layer 2 side, that could be on the consensus side,
Right.
and I'll let you kind of guide, and I'll follow you.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. So I think it lends itself to providing some context on our definitions of like Web 1, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, right? A lot of people consider these to be buzzwords, but they're just, frameworks to think about the evolution of technology, right? So Web 1.0 are all these open source standards on top of which the traditional internet is built today. HTTPS, domain name systems, TCP/IP, literally the entire world of the World Wide Web is built on top of these open standards, right? And what we started to see in like, the 2000s and late 1990s is you start to see a lot of these giant tech giants build vertically integrated tech stacks on top of Web 1.0 that are proprietary and they're not open, right? The Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Apples of the world all have these massively vertically integrated tech stacks that control all the rules, all the data, and hence all the value, right? And over the past 20 years, we've seen our world really evolve, right? We have Wi-Fi everywhere, but innovation is really soaring. But taking a step back and peeling back the onion a little bit, like, are we more private? Are we more secure? Maybe, but that's all because we're controlled and puppeteered by these massive Web 2.0 tech giants, right?
The trust is transferred, right?
Exactly.
It just get moved over to the Googles, your banks, and we just automatically trust them, and that's because that's the only option we have at the moment.
Right. And it's really important to think about, like, for the past 2 decades, this is a trade-off that people were willing to make, right? Like, oh, wow, you're going to give me, like, you got to remember, Uber wasn't a thing back in
No,
2000 or even 2010, right? Spotify, I think, started in like 2013, 2014. So all of these brand new things, these bells and whistles about having thousands of songs in your pocket, having email on the go. Of course, we're like, give me it, give me it, give me it, without no concern to our privacy and our security. And the monetization of our data at the end of the day, right? But that's what Web 3.0 is all about, right? Web 3.0 is the more peer-to-peer, decentralized, distributed recreation of Web 2.0, right? We're trying to recreate the functionality, but from a more user-centric standpoint. And the reason why I took the time to explain all of this is because it's so important within the Internet of Things, the IoT, right? If you think about, for me, right, if you say, okay, Spotify or Apple Music knows my listening history. Maybe it's super embarrassing, right? I watched a Blackpink documentary the other day and I was like, what's this all about? What's K-pop all about, right? But I don't care about people knowing that part of my life. But I have two of these installed in my home, right? There's a home security camera. When you're talking about footage from my living room or footage from my hallway because I'm trying to figure out who's stealing my packages, then no, you cannot know that at all, right? You don't need to know when my mail is delivered every day, when my dog eats, when I wake up, when anything within my private home happens, right? So there's different levels to this need for security and privacy that every consumer needs to make by themselves. And the great thing is, I think people naturally or organically or start to piece these things in their heads just because of all the fake news out there, and just because, see all these disaster stories about Ring cameras being hacked. It takes a lot of these, it's either you become more and more jaded and you fall deeper into the rabbit hole of Web 2.0, or you're more and more shocked and outraged every time you see those things. And, I think we're focusing on that faction of people that are shocked and will adopt technologies like this. And this is already being sold on Amazon, right? It's designed for the mass market. It uses blockchain as kind of like the login mechanism. As we all know, private keys are self-generated and known only to the user. So we take that private key and we use it to end-to-end encrypt all of your information. Basically, what that means is none of your data is decrypted outside of your phone. And the only place where your files can be decrypted is using the private key on your phone, right? And this is really a combination of end-to-end encryption, edge computing, and blockchain, right? So I mentioned the blockchain login part. End-to-end encryption, we use your private key to end-to-end encrypt all of your information. And we do all of the processing on the edge, right? So there's no centralized servers at play here. Your data is never decrypted outside of these two devices, your phone and your camera. And anytime in between, fully end-to-end encrypted with the private key that you own. So this is kind of like a new architecture that IoTeX and Web 3.0 is proposing, right? Get rid of the centralized servers that are literally the reason why every bad thing in this world happens today. That giant Twitter hack where like Kanye and Joe Biden and whatever tweeted, that was an inside job because there's a centralized server with God mode access, right? And every single hack you see today is because of passwords or because of centralized servers. So
to go back to transferring data to your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to worry about the phone now, or is that like does IoTeX encompass the phone like security as well, or like is it in the network? And because I saw you just right, it's transferring information. Do we have to worry about our phone as well, or?
Your phone is a special type of device, right? I think it's good to break down different types of IoT devices, right? I think the anatomy of an IoT device is generally very similar, right? Although IoT may seem like such a vast and wide industry, there's so many verticals, right? Healthcare, supply chain, agriculture, smart home, smart city, automotive, everything. Like everything's becoming an IoT device, right? But if you really peel back the onion and look at what the anatomy is, they all have some type of power or battery supply. They all have some type of connectivity to the internet, meaning cellular, Wi-Fi, low power, long range, which is called LoRa. Or it has some type of sensors to capture real world phenomena and digitize it. And finally, it has some compute, network, and storage, right? And I would say the real differentiation is, a combination of those things, right? But your phone is a very special type of IoT device. It has multiple ways of doing computation, right? If you think about on your phone today, the most sensitive processes, all of that is done in a piece of secure hardware. It's a built-in trusted execution environment, a TEE, right? And basically, anytime your face IDs happen, your fingerprint scans happen, or any of those passwords that you have in your key loggers, all of that is stored in your secure hardware, your trusted execution environment, which is meant to be an unhackable piece of your device. Anything that happens within that is trusted, it's secure, and that's a hardware-based privacy and security protection, right? So the combination of your phone, which uses that secure hardware module to store your private key locally, and the fact that the only time your videos from this camera can be decrypted is when you have that private key, and the only place your private key is stored is locally. That's how we use the combination of these technologies to really have like a permissioned access to your videos, right? So people ask us a lot of times, like, where's the information on this stored if it's not stored on blockchain, right? You can store it on local SD card, has like a slot right here. You can store it on cloud, but regardless of where your data is stored, it's end-to-end encrypted with the private key that only you have.
And I think
even if it's intercepted in transit, you're still getting like encrypted files, right? So that's where the protection comes from.
Yeah, and you're touching on another question. I might as well wrap it in here with the difference of data privacy and like data transparency, right? Like consumers, we just talked about it. Like we're kind of giving up a lot of our information, through the evolution of the internet. Giving up emails and we have all these passwords and we're clicking into websites. As you mentioned, everything's Alexa, right? She might even turn on right now.
Yeah.
Is probably listening to this conversation.
Yeah.
But maybe this ties into where you're going locally and what you're willing to give up, I think is important. And I don't know. I think a lot of people understand it. I think it might be generational in a little bit where, we got used to giving up our information because we trust, it's coming down to trust. And now there's other options for us to opt in, opt out,
Mhm.
use different mechanisms, use different platforms and networks or products, right?
Mhm.
That can distinguish like privacy and transparency. Of course, you know, like you said, we don't want to give up you know, our social security numbers, you know, our personal information,
Right.
other, you know, financial information, health
Mhm.
information. And then there's also like data transparency, where there are some things that like, and we talked about this, which we'll probably maybe get into shortly right now, is the
Yeah.
Pebble tracker, which that's like data transparency
Right.
of provenance. Like,
Yeah.
am I buying what I'm really buying, right? And so I think and you're tackling both of those, which is great.
Yeah.
And I think it's good timing because, as you're mentioning, like we got used to this Web 2.0. Like, I mean, we have to use Google's. You know, we have to use we don't have to, but we're using
Mhm.
Google's. We're
Right.
using Facebook's. We're using, you know, the Fang,
Mhm.
you know, services, right? And I think you're at a good point as, you know, we convert to Web 3.0, and now we can choose what we
Right.
want to give up and don't want to give up.
Yeah.
I think it's important for our audience to understand, like, it's not just IoT and blockchain. IoT's been around. Blockchain and cryptography's been around like for years. It's
Mhm.
just, it's all coming together with the devices now being able to be compatible. You guys are, you know, composability, compatibility,
Mhm.
functionality, right? I think it
Yeah.
all makes sense. And I think it's good timing for IoTeX, especially with what's ahead. And again, all these uh, Experian being hacked and
Mhm.
everybody being hacked. And I think you're providing like a great service.
Yeah. I mean, just to add a little color to that, right? I think what you're talking about is very timely and important, right? I think that everyone is a little conscious about where their information is going these days, right? And that's just due to the fact that social media has kind of blown up in our faces, right? To the point where we don't feel comfortable anymore talking about certain things in our homes, maybe because we don't want it to show up, or we know Alexa's listening, or all these kind of things, right? Um, but what's really fascinating to think about is just like the open source software movement that's kind of being bootstrapped with blockchain, right? There's also a big open source hardware movement going on, right? Because the hardware, all these devices today, right, whether it's a laptop, a Bitcoin mining server, a phone, these are the gateways between the physical and the digital worlds, right? And if we're talking about building a new virtual and digital world, then the information that feeds that has to be 100% verifiable and trusted, right? And having an intermediary between the data creation step and the data utilization step, where someone is, you know, doing some data scrubbing or data validation, who knows what kind of things, like, you know, the intermediaries, like a Google or an Amazon, what kind of resources they have to manipulate that information for their business profits, right? And that's not like a imagination thing. Like, this is the reason why Amazon's $1 trillion company is because they're savages, right? And capitalism works because of industries like this, right? Competition is great. We'll see what comes from this like antitrust DOJ lawsuit with Google, but you know, there's reasons why people are putting all of these like they're trying to side skirt regulations, privacy regulations. They're trying to do everything they can to hold on to our information. There's a reason for that, because they're business savages and they know that this is how they have value, right? So the there's a few ways to attack this current status quo, right? One of them is through regulation, and I think it's already helping a lot, right? Like GDPR in Europe, I think there's already, you know, billions of dollars of fines related to companies misusing users' data. But the thing with GDPR and CCPA is it doesn't solve the root issue. It just provides financial remediation for those that are hurt, right? So if I have my data and someone misuses it correctly, I can't roll back the misuse correctly step. I can just get some money from like a class action lawsuit, right? So if you ask me, is making people aware that there are regulations, but these are going to be side skirted just like history has told us, right? So if we're trying to move to a fully, you know, user-centric, user-owned world, then a lot of these things start with the devices that we put in our homes, right? And starting to drill into people's heads that owning your data is not just about monetization, it's not just about privacy, and it's not just about control. It's about all of the above, right? It's the prerequisite to all of those things, right? So people that are using UCAM and owning their videos, right? They can also, if they wanted to, they can use this camera to create like a decentralized OnlyFans and have their fun that way, right? Or, once you own your data, you can't sell what you don't own, right? So if you're wanting to monetize your data and dream about all these different streams of passive income, you live your life, and income, the more interesting life you live, the more income you get. These things are all happening, but it all starts from a prerequisite of user centricity and the devices that we use today.
No, I was telling my dad too about I'm like, shouldn't advertisers and all these ads and info and people trying to call us and sell us things, like, shouldn't they be paying us? And he's like,
right.
Yeah, you're right. Like you see all those when you're scrolling and all these things pop up, like we're giving them all this value information.
I think the advertising space is super interesting. Sorry to cut you off there, but
no, go for it. Yeah.
I think like a lot of people talk about like experiments online these days where they gather data from your app usage and then allow you to sell it in different ways, right? Some of them is you just give up your data and then you can qualify for surveys and then you can take the surveys and get money. Some of them you can sell your data outright for like pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
But I think it's really discouraging for people because they see like, oh, I hear on the news Google's making billions of dollars with my data. Why, when I sell it, why can't I get billions of dollars? It's because they spent the past like 2 decades building out their surveillance capitalism and advertising bidding behemoth of like a tech stack, right? And without that tech stack and without the ability to pump new data into it with like increasing network effects, like what they built is really beautiful, right? But from a capitalist perspective. But if we're talking about like the decision whether to fuel what they've built for the past 20 years or build something from the ground up where we can have a decentralized automated market making algorithm like everyone's using with these DEXs these days, but to connect advertisers and people that want to be advertised to, these are the things that I think are the really billion, trillion dollar ideas that's replacing the Web 2.0 beautiful kind of business models, but flipping them so that corporations are buying from users instead of the other way around, right? Easier said than done. And when you apply it again to the IoT space, it's so interesting to think about because there's a reason why Google bought Fitbit for $3-4 billion in 2016. There's a reason why Amazon bought PillPack, which is a prescription drug delivery to your door company. They want to know all of these things about our health and our bodies so that they can further manipulate our actions, right? It's not, I encourage everyone that is like doubtful of the reality of this to watch that new Netflix documentary with the people that literally built these systems, like Sandberg and all these folks, right? So it's just really eye-opening. And I think that awareness is the first part, but having solutions and alternatives that don't make you have to, sacrifice your user experience to the core. And that's exactly what I think IoTeX is really focused on, to bootstrap this idea and this concept to the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we could probably go on for days. Like it's a business strategy shift. And like, I don't think obviously corporations are open to it. This goes into healthcare too. Like, they should be paying for our data and like our, all the trials that we join, blah, blah, blah. But so I want to talk about also like, so we just talked about like the why of IoTeX and like, tackling this thing head on in a variety of ways. We can go on forever, but I want to touch it. We don't have to go too granular, but for the audience watching of like how you're doing it. And what I mean by that is like IoTeX distinguishes itself, with like 3 main functionalities and like service offerings, which I'll let you kind of go down the path, but kind of explain at a high level, just why, again, you scale, why yours is privacy centric, right? And I think just to kind of kick it off, it's like the consensus mechanism, like your layer 2 chain, which has like, sub chains and like the root and all that, and then the cross network like interoperability and like even edge trusted computing. So like that's kind of a lot there, but I think you can probably touch a little bit on each. I want to make sure we save some time, but I think it's important not just to say like we're like, IoTeX is tackling this and like, hitting it head on with solutions, but I think it's just important to highlight like how you're doing it. And I think that's valuable of the innovation that you guys have been doing for quite some time. So I'll let you kind of kick that off.
Would love to. I mean, my favorite thing in the world is providing context, because I think context is just so important, right? And
it helps us make sense of it. It helps us make sense of what it is. And I'm just interested too to kind of hear your perspective on and how you explain kind of the delegated. You guys do it different. Everything's a little bit different. So I think that's cool to highlight.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of design decisions even from the start of the project that kind of walk through. But I think this thing around finding the context, right? Like in the crypto space, things are moving like a million miles an hour. And I think a lot of the times, this is a learning lesson for us, because the past 2 months have just been warp speed building and announcements. And taking a step back after the craze of it, you start to realize like, wow, like do people that we made one announcement and then maybe 100 new people came in, and then we made another announcement and these guys have no context on what this next thing is about, right? So finding ways to not only focus on what's new, but how it ties into what's old is really important, right? So let me start all the way from the beginning about
the story and the journey.
Yeah, the journey, right? So we started back in 2017, and we really had the vision about this intersection in blockchain, IoT, and privacy before anyone was really taking us seriously, right? And then throughout the past years, we really spent 2018 and 2019 building out the test net, launching the first mainnet, and also rolling out our consensus mechanism. And all of that was built 100% from scratch. No forks, no nothing, right? So a lot of the design decisions we made, again, were focused on fitting blockchain to IoT. And that made us decide, to write our own consensus mechanism and design our architecture in a way that was very modular and extensible, right? Because IoT, like we mentioned, the anatomy of these devices is fundamentally similar, but the difference is about the applications and what the data is pointed to, and the layer twos that will feed from these foundation of devices was really important to think about, right? But jumping back to the consensus side, we knew we had to have one that was super fast, right?
Yeah.
And we knew that we needed one that was instantly finalized, meaning it doesn't take multiple rounds of confirmations to get there. Because if we're talking about the real-time passing of information between IoT devices, you can't be waiting on confirmations, and that's just like a bottleneck in your automation, right? So we designed what we call role depots. It's a variant of delegated proof of stake designed 100% in-house. And we maintain the same performance of role depots, but we add a randomized selection layer on top of it to increase the decentralization, right? So as EOS kind of has 21 block producers that are fixed and are voted in and are the ones that mine, 24 of our top 36 top voted delegates are randomly selected every hour to do consensus, which is great from the security side of things. And because there's still only 24 people at a time running consensus, you maintain the same performance, except there's more of a selection pool on top, right? So to the scalability point, we see our consensus mechanism at layer one as a very big driver of scalability, but also the ability to create layer two chains, both to outsource scaling to a layer two chain, or to define more like application specific layer two chains or applications that can be running, right? And another layer two thing that we're designing is kind of a tokenomics layer on top of layer one, right? So layer one is all about the traditional like staking and voting for a delegate. You'll earn rewards, you'll earn kind of these things, but we've also added a layer two tokenomics on top, which is linked to, which kind of makes IoTeX like a declining total supply token over time. So with every new device that's registered to the IoTeX network, a portion of the total supply is burned. And I think that's really interesting to really, because these devices are being adopted by the community and used. So I think that's really the tie of our tokenomics and the activity of these devices on the tokenomics side. But
Do you still have I know you guys launched with a native token and then also an ERC20. Is that
yeah,
still, is that,
so when we launched we launched the ERC20 token in 2018, right? So just continue that story a little bit. In April of 2019 is when we launched our native blockchain. It's called Mainnet GA, or Mainnet Alpha rather. And that was like a hybrid network because we had staking and voting going on in Ethereum in 2018. And then we launched our native chain and had staking and voting going on there, right? So we basically merged both of those kind of staking and voting histories into our mainnet GA, which is now a fully native chain. So it was kind of like it's kind of a launch Ethereum first, launch on Ethereum first, then launch native chain, and then phase out the Ethereum to native chain. So
I see.
all completed now. And that's really given us a lot of control and ability to really design our ecosystem the way we want to.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of information there, but like you said, I think it's important as we continue, and we've talked a lot within the REIMAGINE conferences and just on the phone, and I think it's always cool to see how one's doing it, right? I think during the 2017, everybody was like, this is, or during the ICO craze and like, the under deliverables and like, under promising and or over promising and like, not delivering. And also the scams and frauds was just off of a white paper. Like you can design anything. It's the execution part. And you guys are succeeding at that and executing on what, you say you're going to do. And not only that, you have a general concern about, and I think your team has plays to that, right? You have an extensive team from a lot of the big players in the space, right? In the past.
It's funny because all these like oligopoly tech giants we're talking about, a lot of the team comes from those places. So the respect that they have for the sophistication of the tech that they've built is immense, right? I think we should all not view Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, etc. as the enemy, right? They've made our lives 100 times better. It just so happens that they're capitalists, right? They're going to make their money. They're going to feed their shareholders. It's the reality of the world. So given that and accepting those as the rules of our world, what can we do to really change that, right? We're not going to take down these giant tech companies. Maybe the US government has the ability to do that by breaking them up into smaller companies, but that's it. They're not doing anything illegal. And if they are, they're just going to pay fines. And that's the way the world works, right? So if you don't want to play in that ecosystem, the best part is you don't have to coming up very soon, right? There were no alternatives before, but blockchain is providing alternative banking, alternative IoT, alternative everything that you can really take advantage of now. And I think, you talked a lot about like some of the other like pillars that IoTeX is working on, right? I think one interesting thing that was really big last year, and I don't know why people stopped talking about it, is all about decentralized identity, right? Yeah. Decentralized identity is one of three types of common identities today, right? The first is like a normal identity. You go on any website, you type in a username and password that's not associated with anything else in your life. And that's like a one-to-one connection, right? One identity, one website. There's also a concept of federated identity, which is I create my Google or Facebook or Gmail and I sign in to many websites using that single identity, right? The final one is decentralized identity. And it's different from the others because you are the only one that owns that identity and you're required to kind of, it's kind of like a passport, right? You're required to fill the stamps so that other people can trust you and let you into different places, right? And a lot of people are thinking about NFTs and like a lot of ways to represent digital snapshots of people or businesses, but that's the long way around. The easy way is decentralized identity, right? It's like you have your identity, you can add DID documents to it, which represent, different facets of your life. And going back to the thing about, what information you choose to share, your decentralized identity means that you can authorize people to see some or all of your decentralized identity components, right? And I think one thing that really brought me into Bitcoin was the fact that this is the argument that someone made that When we send a banking transaction between you and I, Adam, what information do we absolutely need to know about each other? And it's a sender, receiver, and the value. And that's all that's in a Bitcoin transaction, right? So if we think about all these authorizations, when we use Pebble Tracker in the supply chain space, right? What this thing allows you to do is rather than just saying, hey, here are my raw GPS coordinates, I can selectively share the information I need you to know so that we can continue our business, right? Maybe all you need to know is this vehicle is within 5 miles of the destination instead of the raw GPS coordinates. Maybe you just need to know this package has been held below 0 degrees Celsius because it's perishable fish. You don't need to know the exact things, right? But if you have the verifiable data and you can prove to people that the information you're offering is trustworthy, that flips the entire, information control game, right? You want more information from me, it's going to cost you more, right? So it allows people to be capitalists with their own data, and I think that's really freaking cool.
Yeah, and you brought up an important thing. Like, I'm sure there's viewers right now looking at us and listening to, well, all of these big players and institutions like made my life better and easier, and totally true. Like I love being able to, if I have fraud on my card, I can call them up and they give me my money back. Or, right. I don't get my shipment, I just hit up Amazon, like they resend it, right? Yeah. And those are all important. But I think moving forward, the critical aspect and component is we'll have optionality and we'll be able to choose. We'll probably have 2 phones, an old traditional phone that operates on maybe legacy systems or maybe some innovation there. Or, a privacy centric, type of device or something, right. That just gives us the option to offer information or not. And so those are really important points that's kind of the direction that you're taking and that we're all focusing on. Right. And I think it's important to note that. And I think, decentralized identity is crucial, right? To a lot of our life. And I think a lot of people do you know anybody that's kind of come close to solving that a little bit? Or
the tricky part with decentralized identity is that it's not about the technology not being ready, right? Like IoTeX has published our DID spec for people, devices, and businesses. It's one of the only DID specs to include this kind of human to machine, machine to business, device to device, machine to human to human, like all these different combinations, right? So that's been out for, I think, the better part of a year now. But the tricky thing with decentralized identity is that thing I told you about, collecting reputation, right? Collecting the stamps in your passport. If there's not enough real world entities out there, like the DMV or the government, that's going to issue you a decentralized version of a driver's license that you can attach to your decentralized identity, like I think the actual technology side is going very well. Anyone that's adding DID to their blockchains today can universally resolve that DID to any other DID on another blockchain. If you think about, and that what that means is that these DIDs are interoperable no matter what blockchain you deploy them on, right? Because they're all following the W3C World Wide Web Consortium standard. And you think of it, it's like the purest interoperability standard for a lot of blockchain networks today. If the identities and the intake mechanisms and the way that entities are defined across blockchains are similar, then they can become interoperable in an easier fashion, right? So while a lot of people are thinking about WBTC and TBTC and IOBTC, we already have our version of BTC on the chain for like interoperability of assets, interoperability of identities and data is something that's really sad that, it's kind of lost attention in the past, but I think it's going to pick up a little bit more soon. And once you start to think about when all this stuff becomes a little bit more automated, right? Then you have devices that are smarter than humans. You can program devices with specific goals and they will know, okay, to achieve this goal, I need to give up only this information. Or maybe I can give up this information and get this that much faster, right? All of these like machine learning on the edge, all of these like combinations that people consider to be buzzwords. Like I can name like 5 or 6 buzzwords that aren't buzzwords. They're real tools that people are using today. 5G, blockchain, confidential computing, edge computing, end-to-end encryption. The list goes on, right? But these are all tools. They're not the panaceas. They're not the silver bullets that solve everything individually. But when you layer on these things together, like we've done with UCAM and Pebble, then you really start to have really the world's first privacy preserving and functional devices, right? So we think that's really cool.
No, yeah, I mean, I think there's so many layers to this thing, and I know we got a few minutes here. I want to talk about the consortiums that you just joined with, like Facebook, R3, NVIDIA, right? Maybe collaborate on that. I think that's kind of a cool update. And one, like, are you guys setting standards? Is that kind of a goal by joining as well with everybody, and as everybody moves forward?
Yeah, I think that's another pillar of our project, right? So we work with a lot of, as far as partnerships go, right? We work with a lot of device manufacturers and chip manufacturers. Just to go back to these one last time, like this was designed with a security cam manufacturer called Tenvis, and they've been around since 2005. They sold millions of cameras to government, to enterprise, to consumers. And this was actually a partnership with Nordic Semiconductor, who's a chip manufacturer, a billion-dollar chip manufacturer from Sweden. So we work directly with these companies to build out new products, but another way that we kind of rub shoulders with these big companies is through our work in consortiums, right? And we're part of 3 consortiums right now. The first being the Industrial Internet Consortium, which is like more of a product development and corporate end user testing consortium. The types of standards that people develop are how kind of other standards work together to create full stack products. Maybe combining technologies from many enterprises together. And that's really the sandbox environment where, you know, a lot of these capitalistic companies don't talk to each other, don't work together, but within these consortiums, it's kind of like it's like a safe ground for people to work together. There's a lot of kind of antitrust things that are embedded within that consortium. And that in that consortium is about 300 plus of the world's top tech organizations, founded by GE, Microsoft, Dell, I believe, and Huawei and some others. We're actually the co-chairs of the blockchain working group alongside representatives from Amazon and Huawei. And within that group, you know, we publish white papers. We try to set up some sandbox environments to combine blockchain and IoT technologies. And from that work actually stemmed one of our more recent partnerships we just announced with WiseKey, who's another type of secure hardware chip manufacturer. So that's kind of how our work and our contributions on the research side into this industrial internet consortium amounts to progress outside of the consortium through these partnerships. And WiseKey is another publicly traded company on the NASDAQ and Swiss Stock Exchange. The one that you mentioned around Facebook and R3 and NVIDIA is actually a consortium called the Confidential Computing Consortium. And confidential computing is all about the concept of using secure hardware, like the thing I mentioned in your iPhone today, that manages your fingerprints and your Face ID, and basically allows you to compute over encrypted data within the confines of a secure hardware device, right? So a lot of people are doing this at the server level to combine fraud data sets into one and create a superset of data without ever exposing the individual parties' raw data that made up this collective data set, right? But a lot of other things, like whether it's just unlocking a phone, all of your ledger devices utilize secure hardware to manage the key signing and things like that. And what's really interesting is in the bigger picture of what I was saying about like what can people do when they own their data, right? One thing they could do is keep it private. Another thing that people really want to do is analyze it privately. And if we're talking about like videos from my living room, I'm probably not going to want to analyze it privately because I can analyze it with my eyes, right? Yeah. But if we're talking about health data and things that, you know, health data is something that everybody wants to own, but nobody's going to be able to analyze unless you're a doctor. So having a way to run algorithms that are open source and verifiable on top of your data that's not open source, meaning data is the thing that's a black box, not the algorithm. And that's the way you flip the model, right? You make the companies that want to analyze your data prove to you that, hey, this is the algorithm I'm running and this is what it does. And you get the insight they don't get the raw data, they provide the service. They're the service provider in the purest form, right? So that's what confidential computing is in our ecosystem. It's a way to take all the data that everyday people and small to medium businesses own and analyze it privately and make use of it, make use of insights. And I think the last pillar of what people can do with their data is to sell it, to monetize it, tokenize it, sell it. And that's what we call our vision of DeFi OT, right? So, and the kind of like the last consortium that we do a little bit of work in is IEEE. And this is I keep on messing up the acronym for this, but it's like the world's largest electrical engineering society, International Electrical Engineering. What's the final E? Whatever. Basically, this is the organization that a lot of people think about as like the purest form of standards, right? A standard meaning like Wi-Fi is a standard. And it's the reason why every single router in the world uses Wi-Fi, right? What other types of standards are there? Like shipping containers, anything that needs to be globally standardized in order to lubricate the supply chains, right? Both from a physical world context, but also digital world complex, right? So a lot of the work that IEEE is doing in this blockchain and IoT space is trying to define different types of standards, right? Decentralized identity is a standard in the digital world. So a lot of the work we do is just sitting in on those discussions. Like the standardization of technology comes many, many years after the adoption of the initial technology, right? So these things are just things you have to stay peeled onto, but across those different consortiums, there's very different purposes and ways that we work within those consortiums. And I don't see any other companies like in the blockchain space in these consortiums. So that's not true. You know, Oasis and iExec are part of the confidential computing consortium because they're also utilizers of confidential computing. But IEEE and IIC, I don't see many people try to tackle it. Yeah.
No, that's great, man. And I think those are important. Consortiums are always great. Like you said, you got to trial some things, and it's a place, you know, for companies to come together and experiment and innovate and see how things work in a safe environment.
But
right?
it's taken so long, right? We joined the IIC like 1.5 years ago, right? And that's why I think you don't see a lot of people, you know, we're for real about this research stuff, right? Go deeply as a technical team. So like, I think for the past 1.5 to 2 years, we've been contributing to this IIC thing without a partnership that has come out of it. And that's the time it takes to build trust with these massive companies. You know, if we're talking about comparing white papers and comparing, you know, product specs and things like that, you really have to beat those enterprises at their own game for them to want to partner with you, right? So for us to achieve that and have partners stemming from our research, I think that's way different than people partnering for any hype or type of marketing things, right?
Totally.
But the thing is, like, when we say, hey, we're partnering with WiseKey, people don't know what that company is, right? Even though they have $100 million in revenue, publicly traded. When we say we're partnering with Nordic Semiconductor, billion-dollar company from Sweden, people don't know who that is, right? So it's a different challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like the types of companies that we partner with are not for the sake of hype or marketing. It's for, you know, it's almost like 6 months after we really start to build some cool stuff, we'll announce the partnership, right? So I think it's just a different flavor of IoTeX. We'll have our day. We'll definitely have our day, I think.
Nice. So we got about 3 minutes left. Last thing I want to touch on is the Halo Grants program.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, we showed this. The REIMAGINE conference is for our university partners and students, and then a lot of, you know, blockchain enthusiasts, developers right in the space, trying to understand, learn, educate themselves even more. Mm-hmm. So I know you have, I think, maybe about 5 projects or so just launched in June. We got a couple minutes left that I want to touch on. Yeah. You know, maybe we can get some more applications your way, right? Or maybe there's some people thinking at home, like, what can I do to develop? And I think you guys are running a great program if they're into this kind of IoT and blockchain. I think it's a great opportunity. So yeah, I want to touch on that program real quick.
So my ask for anyone that's considering building on IoTeX, right? We are very open with what people want to build on our platform. As Adam mentioned, we have this Halo Grants program we launched in June. And we basically allocated 8% of the total token supply to fueling new projects, whether they're more at-home IoT projects or real businesses you want to raise money for that we can support you in, right? What we really want to see people, like the thought experiment we want to give, like at the core of what IoTeX wants to do, we want to be the platform that provides trusted data and trusted devices off the shelf so that developers can then build trusted applications off of that foundation that they can assume to already be trusted, right? So when we talk about devices like these, if I were to give you a database of verifiable videos or data related to the GPS location, temperature, humidity, motion, and light of anything around the world, what are you going to build with it? And the really cool thing that we're trying to start with this Pebble Tracker program is, this can be attached to a car. It could be left in a home. It can be inserted into a package. It could be put on your dog, right? Regardless of what asset this asset tracker is attached to, it paints a clear data story, right? So if I wanted to intersect my data story with your data story to create some type of smart contract result, then I just want to see that people's imaginations open, right? So what we're really trying to do with this is facilitate individual use cases, basically bringing real world data to the blockchain and fueling different types of smart contracts. But the real goal is to bring all these builders that are building on Pebble, allowing them to combine their data for borderless use cases, and just a borderless ecosystem of builders, right? So we're just really excited about putting devices in people's hands, right? I think a lot of times this whole blockchain ecosystem and blockchain world can seem so artificial and fake at times, but holding these products, and I have 3 UCAMs set up in my apartment complex here. So I think just having the ability to use a real world product that uses blockchain not just as a novelty, but as a real tool for privacy. These are just, we'd love to talk to anyone that is remotely interested in anything we talked about today. So just give us a holler.
And where can people kind of learn more about IoTeX and maybe the programs, or where should they start researching if they want to get involved?
Yeah, so if you're more of a dev, we have a really great new dev portal or docs portal. It's just docs, D-O-C-S at iotex.io. But you can just go directly to our website, right? iotex.io. It has a lot of information. We're currently working on a nice ecosystem page to really outline all the, dozens of projects that are building on IoTeX. And I think as far as, we started this conversation talking about developer tools and SDKs, and just want to reconfirm our commitment to making, this end-to-end challenge of bringing, first creating devices that can write and sign data, and then bringing data from the real world through these devices to the blockchain. IoTeX is handling all of that. We just want people to build the applications that use this very rare and brand new type of data that no one's ever seen before in the blockchain space, right? Let me give you an example. A lot of people in the supply chain space are doing blockchain for supply chain, right? And I would say it's at level 2 right now, right? Level 1 was, let's put all the invoices and purchase orders on the blockchain, which is already adding some good value, right? Because anytime the PO or the invoice was changed, you have a history of it. The second level was, okay, let's add QR code scans to it. So warehouse by warehouse, you can scan a QR code, and you can have hop-to-hop traceability, right? And the last piece is really in-transit traceability. And this is what Pebble Tracker does, right? It gives you the in-transit data so that you can attribute faults for whoever, maybe not handling your assets correctly. So I think this is really going to unlock a brand new class of data, which is that in-transit real-time data, instead of just periodic hops that you see with a lot of the Walmart lettuce tracking supply chain type of things. So, but yeah, I think long way to say IoTeX is really doing some unique stuff, and you guys should definitely check it out. If you want to build on any of our devices, just reach out to us.
Awesome. No, and I think we got to conclude here, but I think, first of all, there's going to be more devices coming out, right? We're not going less devices. So career paths, understanding of what direction, what to study, what to get involved in. It seems like obviously blockchain, IoT, IoTeX has the infrastructure, the platform to implement these concepts, these fundamental concepts across, as we've discussed at the beginning, from the backend software to the actual embedded hardware. IoTeX is kind of taking care of all those needs. Now it's just innovation time, and you guys are actively involved in hackathons, actively involved, at the university level. As you just mentioned, trying to get the tooling out there for developers to come in and create things. You have the Halo Grants program, which is kicking off more applications being built on top of IoTeX. So it's super exciting. Again, thank you for joining us. Pleasure to have you on. We always have great discussions. I'm sure we can go on for days, but thank you for taking the time out of your day to come talk about these things. I think it's important. And then, to be honest, we don't have any other IoT blockchain actually projects within the conference, or we've ever had one in the conference. So it's always good to stay updated with you and share these insights and perspectives with our viewers right now. So Larry, first of all, thanks for joining.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it was great to be on the Reimagine series. So looking forward to Q1 2021 updates. But yeah.
Exactly, man. All right. So for all of you tuning in, thanks for listening to Larry and myself. Larry's with the IoTeX team. Feel free to check out their website as well, and all the information's there for you to dive in, get your hands dirty, and build some things cool. So we'll go ahead and sign off here. I'm Adam. This is Larry, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Hey guys. Bye.